Shalom, everybody. Erev Tov from Jerusalem and Boker Tov, Tzoraim Tovim, wherever you are in the world. I'm glad to know that in addition to North America and Israel, we also have European contingency on this call. It's wonderful to be together again for the Hiddush webinar. That is also sponsored by our three partners, JPLAN, the Jewish Pluralism Legal Action Network, Ruach Hiddush, Rabbis and Cantors for Religious Freedom and Equality in Israel, and the American Association of Jewish Lawyers and Jurists. In the last few webinars, we covered the issue of the judicial upheaval. Of course, the government prefers to call it judicial reforms. Some describe it as a coup, an attempted coup. Whatever the title you want to choose, we covered it from different perspectives. Initially, from the legal perspective, analyzing the bills, the initiative, the threats that it presents to Israeli democracy and the independence of the judiciary, and the most recent one with Professor Yofi Tirosh focused on the aspect that concerns gender equality. Gilad Kariv, Rabbi, MK, former chair of the Law and Constitution Committee of the Knesset, former executive director, president of the reform movement in Israel, and a great leader, a great friend, a great mind, and a wonderful speaker. We asked him to be with us today to provide us with yet another perspective, and that is the political perspective. It's important to try and understand not only what made it possible to launch the threat on Israeli democracy and the Israeli judicial system, the rule of law, but also with Gilad to try and understand what may the future hold in store for us. Namely, what may the political setup, the political configuration be, because clearly it'll be different. I think many are acknowledging that nothing will be the same once this is over. Nothing will be the same. It is not going to be just returning to yesterday. So the one additional point that I want to start with is what happened actually today, and that is the Speaker of the Knesset, Ohana, has issued a statement. He has announced that he's going to issue a statement, and then he issued the statement. And the statement, in essence, is threatening the Supreme Court and presenting, in his words, a tamrur atzor, a stop sign, a red stop sign before the Supreme Court. Don't dare cross this line. Of course, he is in good company. His predecessor, Yariv Levin, who is now the Minister of Justice, and who is together with the Gilad's successor, MK Simcha Rotman, who now serves as the chair of the Law and Constitution Committee. And what a difference, a world of difference. On that one can say day and night. And you just have to watch one session of that committee and, you'll get it all, even if you don't understand the language. So Ohana follows in the tradition that was established by his predecessor, Yariv Levin, when he was Speaker of the Knesset, and I won't go into the details, in which he mocked and challenged the Supreme Court and the Chief Justice, saying, if you want to enforce your ruling, you bring the court's guard here and take over the podium of the Knesset and run the meeting. So Ohana is using different language, but in the same vein. I'm saying that, and I'm saying that with some emotion, to convey to you what I'm sure Gilad will as well. we are facing a major junction in Israeli history. It's not to be or not to be. Hopefully, we will be able to survive this. This is not the issue at hand. The issue is, will Israel be a Jewish and democratic state? And I think you have heard our position, Hiddush's position, and the position of those leading jurists who spoke. Israel will not be a Jewish and democratic state. Its democracy is going to be extremely undermined if these initiatives are allowed to go through. But that you have already heard, we are turning over the microphone to MK, Rabbi Gilad Kariv, to tell us first, how did all of that happen politically? How did that happen now when it didn't happen in the last 75 years? What's the political configuration that made it possible?
So thank you, Uri, Mori, and Mori Verabi. In many ways, I see myself as Uri's disciple and follower, and it's another great opportunity not only to meet you all, but also to thank him for his leadership and guidance inside the circles of the reform, liberal, and progressive movements in Israel and around the world, and today on a much broader scope as the leader of the founder and the leader of Hiddush. I see many familiar faces and names on the screen, and it's wonderful to meet you all and to share with you our concerns and few hopes, and those that I didn't have the opportunity to meet with. I hope we will be able to meet in person in Israel, in the Knesset, and you are all invited. Uri, I would like to suggest that the current situation, the current crisis, is the outcome of a combination of different elements. And I want to take the time to explore shortly, but to explore 6 different elements that we need to consider when we try to analyze the political, ideological, sociological background to this moment of crisis. And I insist not to focus on one element, because I think we all need to understand that the current developments are a direct result of something deep and wide that happened in the Israeli society in the last few decades. And it is also needed in order for us not to hold a vague dream that by addressing one element or one political configuration, we will be able to remove the threat on the core values of the State of Israel. Now, the first element I want to suggest is the failure of the democratic bloc to organize itself towards the last national elections in a sufficient and sophisticated enough manner. And I'm sure you all know the details. My party is definitely carrying some of the responsibility for it. The fact that we didn't unite the Labour Party with Meretz, but I belong to those that insist that what we experienced is a chain accident that actually impacted all elements in our wide democratic bloc that was the foundation of the former government. We lost more than 100,000 votes in the Arab sector. Benny Gantz and Yair Lapid competed on the same target audiences instead of dividing the political labor between them and enabling or sending Benny Gantz to bring moderate right-wing voters. And of course, as I said, labor and merits. And that's one critical element. It is deeply connected to another element we need to keep in mind, and that's the fact that since mid-80s, Israel is really divided between two political camps and blocs. And unfortunately, in the last almost 40 years, we see that the more liberal, more democratic, more moderate bloc doesn't succeed to create a strategic shift in this division. And when your political system is so divided into two halves, and there is basically a status quo of equality between the two political blocs, it pushes the system to more radical views. The third element has to do with the changing nature of the Israeli right. And here we need to remember that it is not only the fact that the right-wing Orthodox bloc has today 64 mandates. It is a different right-wing Orthodox bloc than the one we knew for many years since 1977, when Menachem Begin created this alliance between the right-wing parties and the ultra-Orthodox parties. The role of the extreme ultra-nationalist right in this current coalition and government is unprecedented. The way the ultra-nationalist agenda conquered major parts of the Likud itself. When we're talking today about ultra-nationalist views, we're not only talking about the disciples of Kahana or the political successors of Kahana, Itamar Ben-Gvir. We are talking also today about leading political figures inside the governing party, inside the Likud. And today, the more moderate right-wing, old-style Republicans are a small minority inside the Likud, and you can definitely identify a long list of politicians inside the Likud that can easily fit themselves in Itamar Ben-Gvir's party or in Smotrich's party. The fourth element that we need really to remember, and it is critical, is the fact that we are now experiencing a global wave. We're experiencing in Israel the global wave of populism and populist politics. And we need to remember that while we can definitely identify some unique characteristics to the Israeli situation, we are part of an extremely disturbing global phenomena that exposed the weakness of the traditional democratic structures that were developed after the Second World War in the Western world. And those weaknesses are revealed also here in Israel. And in many ways, they are, when they meet the Israeli reality, they become to be even more radical and strong. A fifth element I want to address, and again, it goes back to our responsibility. And I think we need to put it on the table, especially in order to plan wisely our agenda for the future. Our government, the former Israeli government and its coalition, did many good things and succeeded to promote many important political, economic, social, and in a way even constitutional moves. But we need to be honest enough and brave enough in order to admit that we missed a very important constitutional opportunity. And our government and coalition neglected the need to use this unique situation that you have such a wide coalition, not by numbers, but by representing the different Israeli ideologies and communities. Remember, it's a government that started with the leaders of the settlers. Naftali Bennett was the prime minister. And it ended for the first time in the history of Israel, not with Meretz, but also with an Israeli Arab, Israeli Palestinian party that for the first time joined the coalition. And in many ways, this was the most suitable government and coalition to reach some constitutional agreements, mainly in regard to the relations between the Israeli judiciary or judicial branch and its legislative branch, the Knesset, and the government. And again, for different reasons. Remember, we started with the pandemic. Israel faced many domestic and external challenges. It wasn't a very easy coalition and government to run. But we need to say out loud, we neglected this duty to try to set an agreed upon constitutional base for the relations between the different branches of government. And we see the result of this failure today, when this coalition fully understands that this is their moment to set the constitutional guidelines and to prevent a future attempt by a more moderate coalition to set the rules of the game. And the last element, and I kept it to the end of the list, has to do with the things that Hiddush and the Israeli Action Religious Center and the Reform Movement and many other partners in our civil society world have alerted for many years. There is a deep, deep connection between the way Israel structured the relations between synagogue and state and the current situation. There is no way to understand the current moment without taking into consideration the enormous impact of the religious Orthodox establishment. I will add to it also the establishment of the settlements movement. It's a combination of the infrastructures of the ultra-nationalist camp in Israel, mainly led by the settlement movements, and the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox infrastructures. And Uri mentioned at the beginning of our discussion that the Speaker of the Knesset today, an hour ago, threatened the Supreme Court, but this morning, 10 hours before the Speaker of the Knesset released this statement, a group of almost 100 famous rabbis, most of them are being paid by the government, released the same statement. And it's important to say that, again, in this current moment of Israel, it's easy to identify the footprints not of the traditional politicians of the Likud, but mainly the footprints of the ultra-nationalist players and the ultra-Orthodox establishment. And I'm saying it because it is quite clear that without addressing this element in the next few years, first by trying to minimize their influence and strength, but at the same time also by building alternative infrastructures, political, communal, educational infrastructures for our camp, maybe we will be able to block this judicial coup because Netanyahu is interested in exploring the opportunity with Saudi Arabia, and because we have today a democratic administration in DC, and because of different elements, of course, the civil protest. But in the long run, unless we address all those elements in a sufficient and sophisticated way, it will be very difficult to block future attempts to renew this coup. So even if we succeed in a tactical move to prevent the legislation in the next few months and even to lead for another round of national elections, we will be stupid if we don't realize that it goes much deeper than losing the last round of national elections.
Thank you, Gilad. You have provided us with a rich tapestry of building blocks or elements that are both internal and external, global and domestic, religious and political. And this sort of leads us directly to the second question. You say that we will need to address those challenges. Mm-hmm. Now the question is not what we need to address, but will we be able to address? Is it not overwhelming to the point, and given the Israeli shift to the right, is it not the case that we may not be able to do so? So could you provide us with some scenarios, realistic scenarios, but they could be ambitious, as to how all of that is going to be resolved? How is Israel going to be able to move forward in the path that I think everybody on this call and many, many more in Israel and in the global Jewish community are aspiring for?
So I'll start by saying that it was extremely important for me to present all different elements, because I really believe we need today to create some kind of a combination between tactical responses and a more strategic thinking. And I'm not trying to suggest that, I can present a very clear overall theory how to address all those elements. And take, for example, the global element that requires a much more sophisticated thinking of what can be done together in our different countries. So I wanted to place it on the table that really it goes beyond the figuration of our political system, and that we all carry a responsibility. It doesn't mean that we all need to deal with all different elements, but in the end, we need to create a network, an Israeli network, a worldwide Jewish network, and a global network of people that are committed to the universal values of democracy and humanism, to make sure that we address all elements in different ways. Going back, to the more tactical priorities, especially when I address the political arena, I'm sure that there are others that can talk a lot about, especially you, about the need to deal with the growing presence of the Orthodox establishment in Israel. I want to suggest the following thoughts in regard to what we should do. First, we need to strengthen, to maintain, and to sustain the current civil democratic wave that we experience in Israel. In the end, this is the main reason why the coalition didn't succeed till today to implement its original plan and timeline for the judicial coup. Today, as I said, maybe there are some other positive elements. The fact that leading democracies around the world, led by the American administration, started to pay attention seriously to the developments in Israel. I mentioned the opportunity with Saudi Arabia and other opportunities in the area. But it's important to remember that the only reason why this judicial coup was not fully legislated in the first 6 months of this coalition is because of this unexpected and unprecedented wave of political activism, political awareness, and social activism in the Israeli streets. And it's important to say that whatever we plan to do in the more formal political arena, right now we need to pay attention and to direct our efforts to sustain this civil protest. It has tactical achievements in slowing the judicial reform or the legislation, but it also has strategic contributions to the different elements I mentioned, because it is clear that the weakness of the more liberal camp in Israel has to do with the fact that sometimes for good reasons and sometimes for bad reasons, the average liberal Israeli removed himself from the political arena in the last 3 to 4 decades. And it's not only about the growing strength of the ultra-nationalist and ultra-Orthodox infrastructures, it's also around the fact that the liberal camp in Israel privatized itself. And the balance between us being political creatures and us being citizens of the world and leaders of the booming Israeli economy and individuals, the balance was destroyed in our more liberal camp. And the civil protest signals also the growing awareness of hundreds of thousands of Israelis to move to a more involved position, and the revival of our political infrastructures cannot be done without it. Now, in a more concrete way, there is a quiet discussion inside, let's say, the democratic camp in Israel. What is the best way to organize our camp in the future? Or actually what we need to start to do today. One thing is clear. We are not allowed to lose again around 300,000 votes in the national elections. And there is a precondition to any type of political setting for the future, that whatever we do, the white democratic camp must not lose even one vote. If you know what Netanyahu did before the last elections, he mainly invested his time in order to bring together all the players in his right-wing, ultra-Orthodox camp, and to make sure that he is not losing one vote and he succeeded. And we need to do the same. After saying that this is the precondition to any new structure, there is a debate. What is the best way to organize the camp? There is a theory that is aiming towards the creation of what we call in Israel the Israeli Democratic Party, trying to copy the American bipartisan model and suggesting the creation of a strong, well-based party that is in a way quite diverse in its ideologies and brings together different communities, different political players, different political ideologies on the basis of a narrow joint agenda that mainly has to do with liberal values and the liberal character of Israel. Now, this is an important theory. It definitely secures the ability of creating serious political infrastructures. Yet, I'm holding a different theory, because in the end, the main political challenge that we have for the next round is to identify those 10 to 15 mandates in the Israeli right that consider themselves to be liberal right-wing Israelis and are holding the traditional views of the moderate Republican Israeli right. And the main thing we need to do after not losing one vote in our camp is to make sure that those 5, 10, or 15 mandates are joining our bloc. And in order to do that, I tend to believe that we need an independent, moderate, right-wing player in the ideological sequence of our camp. It might be the party of Gantz, but it might be a different party that will organize itself. People are talking or are using the names of the former Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and the former Minister Yoaz Endel and Gidon Saar, of course, the former Ministry of Justice. I tend to believe that if Gilad Kariv is part of a wide party, united party, it will be extremely difficult to bring those 10 mandates from the moderate right, and this is the opportunity to do it because of this response to the radical views and political behaviors of the current government, and we see it in the polls. And I tend to believe that in the end, we need to reorganize our camp. It should be one camp, but it should be led by 3 to 5 political structures. One needs to address in a very clear way the soft right in Israel. The second has to deal with those people that are identified as the Merkaz, the people in the center, the Yesh Atid, Yair Lapid audiences. The third is the Zionist left on the basis of a unification of labor and Meretz and other players, and of course the Palestinian or the Arab Israeli parties. And I said 3 to 5 because there is also the Russian bloc led by Avigdor Lieberman, and this is a very important audience, and we need to make sure that they don't go and vote to the right, but they vote to our bloc. And I think that what we need to commit ourselves to do is to make sure that we are fully coordinated between, for creating a good coordination between the different players in a way that secures, A, that we're not losing any vote, and second, that we are not competing on the same target audiences. I will add to it, with your permission, and I will stay with you for the time we need. I'll add only two political elements. One, we need to be very clear that with all the difficulties, and I'm not ignoring the difficulties, there are difficulties, but we need to be very clear that we are going to repeat the move of creating political partnership with Israeli Arab parties. We need it to be clear, so we will be able to bring the Israeli Arabs to vote. And we have a challenge with the voting rate in the Israeli Arab sector. And one of the ways to do it is to say that from our perspective, the experience we just mentioned, the fact, again, one element is making sure that we repeat this challenging but positive, basically, experience of building partnership with the Israeli Arab parties. And I already mentioned the Russian-speaking Israeli audience, and I think that we need to make some serious moves in this target audience of more than 1.5 million Israelis. And here, unfortunately, again, the right-wing camp did a better work in addressing this specific audience, and we need to identify what we can do with it. I'm reminding us all that this is the audience that pushed Netanyahu to the opposition in 1999. And since then, we didn't succeed to repeat this achievement in this specific target audience, and this is something we need to address. And again, there are many other things we can suggest, but
there are a couple of questions that I received that I will present to you, and you'll be able to respond to them briefly. And one question that I want to add to that. One question was submitted by Alan Warshaw, mentioning an element that you alluded to but didn't address directly, and that is the Constitution. Is there, in your view, any real likelihood that Israel will adopt a constitution, a worthwhile constitution, and how could that happen? And the question that Rabbi Linda Henry Goodman asked was what you describe about the need to bring together these different forces from the moderate right to the Arab parties, etc. Wasn't that the attempt in the previous government under Bennett and Lapid, which fell apart? So what would be different now? And let me add one more question to that, and that is maybe to give our audience some good feeling, better feeling, because some of what you said, while being so true, is going to give us some stomachache and heartburn. But so the good news is, and I wonder how you see it, repeatedly, different news channels have conducted polls looking at how will Israelis vote now, this time around. And of course, each of those polls is true to the time that it is held, but it's consistent for weeks now. And the current coalition that has 64 seats out of the 120 in all polls falls short of the necessary majority and can reach together, all the elements will reach together somewhere between 50 and 54. And the previous coalition, putting aside Gilad, did we lose you
No,
again?
I'm with you.
No.
I'm with you.
Okay. So the previous coalition building blocks will have, according to all those polls, a majority without needing the assistance of Balad and the other Arab party that refuses to participate, to support it. And yesterday there was a poll that showed the majority of the public wants new elections now. So will new elections be held? When will new elections be held? How can this be brought about? Clearly, the current coalition will not want elections now. And are you as optimistic as the polls show? And of course, Alan Warsher's and Rabbi Linda Henry Goodman's question about the Constitution and how is it different from the previous coalition. Someone is, just a second, let me mute. Someone needs to be muted. Please, everybody, other than Rabbi Gilad Kariv, mute yourself. All right, Gilad, go ahead.
So, in regard to Ellen's important question, in a way, I addressed it by saying that unfortunately, our coalition, that was in many ways the most suitable coalition in government to create a positive constitutional move, because we were extremely diverse. And because in the end we didn't have a huge majority, but we reflected all the different ideological players in the Israeli society. And even when we talk about the ultra-Orthodox community that was not represented in the coalition, definitely our government and coalition was sensitive to the needs and the ideas of this community. I think we were too sensitive to.
Sorry, unmute yourself.
This was the right coalition to create a positive constitutional move, especially around the relations between the legislative and executive branches and the Israeli Supreme Court. We know that this is a major issue in the Israeli democracy, and the debate didn't start a year ago. This is the debate we are carrying with us since the beginning of the 90s for more than 30 years. So it is quite clear that we could have done much better in addressing this issue. Now, looking into the future, definitely the next moderate coalition will have to address constitutional issues. I don't know if we will be able to end the constitutional project. You know, usually when you write a constitution, you do it in a very critical moment or a moment of a national shift. It's not so easy to write and develop a constitution in the ordinary, in the ordinary routine of a nation, especially if you have to deal with many other external and domestic challenges. Maybe the current crisis creates such a constitutional moment. Again, I don't know if it will lead us to end the constitutional project, but definitely, if we succeed to block this judicial coup and to go to the next elections, the main theme of our wider democratic bloc should be about doing the right constitutional reform. In regard to Rabbi Linda's question, again, I think that definitely our government and coalition failed. First of all, we went to the polls after 18 months, and second, we didn't win the elections. But I still believe that the political model that was presented by this coalition is the most suitable political model to create those constitutional changes or reaching those constitutional agreements. Look, as a left-wing Israeli that is deeply disturbed also with the reality today in the territories and the lack of progress in solving the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, I definitely want to go back to 1992 when the Israeli moderate left and more radical left had together a majority. Probably this is not going to be the case in the coming few years. So the best we can wish for is to go back to the model of what we call in Israel Memshelet HaShinui, the government of change, and to do it in a more sophisticated political manner. And it requires us, again, not to do any political mistakes towards the next elections in the way we built our camp. Now, in regard to your question, Uri, I think that even people, leading figures in the Likud itself and in the other partners in the coalition, they know that this government will not end its term. There is another element that I didn't address, and those are the personal issues of Prime Minister Netanyahu. Today's trial was renewed. In the end, there is also a timeline for those legal procedures, and it plays a role in this analysis that this government will not end its term. It's too soon to say if we will head or to gamble if we are going to the polls towards the end of 24 or the first few months of 25, or that this government will last also the entire year of 25 and will go to the polls at the beginning of 26. But definitely, we need to start and prepare ourselves today if we want, in a way, to establish or to root the numbers that we see today in the polls. And here I'm leaving aside the bigger picture, I'm going to my political camp. It's not a secret that the Israeli Zionist left is actually in a catastrophic situation. We lost Meretz. Right now in those polls that you mentioned, labor is disappearing. And even if it is only about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we need to insist on the presence of the Israeli Zionist left as an influential player. We're not going to lead the next government. We are not going to bring back all of our traditional voters. They camped today in Yesh Atid and Benny Gantz party. I don't see them come back to us in the near future. But if there is a lesson to learn from Smotrich and from the ultra-Orthodox parties, is that sometimes with 10 mandates and not 40 mandates, you can actually present the roadmap of the entire camp. And the roadmap of our Zionist left in Israel should bring together three elements: the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and the need to push for a political solution, the well-being of the Israeli welfare system and our social policies, and of course, our liberal agenda of freedom of religion and conscience, and pushing back the Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox establishments.
I would let you go, but Kenterfaith Joy Dentowitz asked a question that I can't resist presenting to you. And Ron Cohen, I apologize. Ron was asking about your meeting with Abbas. Maybe we should be holding a special session on that. It's fascinating, and Gilad is really on the forefront of blending those agendas. This is not the most popular thing, but he's doing it because he's a person of principle and sees the needs of Israel as including that. So I'll ask you Faith's question, but before that, let me just say, we'll be meeting again on September 19th. And on September 19th, we'll do two things. We'll be releasing next week the 2023 Israel Religion and State Index. And you'll be finding out figures and data about where the Israelis are, both on the traditional issues of religion and state, but also how the judicial upheaval campaign has impacted on people's views, how that is translated into the political arena or potentially translated into the political arena, and how in response to Ohana, the public trust in the Supreme Court is higher, approximately 4 times higher than the public trust in the Knesset. So before he is rushing to condemn the court, I think that he and his colleagues have a lot of soul searching to do if they have any integrity, and that, of course, is not at all self-evident. So Faith's question is, what is the most helpful thing North American Jews can do to support Israel now? I couldn't allow myself not to ask
North American and Jews around the world. First of all, I can tell Ron and ask him to feel comfortable because I didn't meet Abbas. I met some Palestinian leaders and political players. It was not Abbas. Once I meet Abbas, I promise you, Ron, I will give you a personal update. I'll do my best to meet him also, because I think that if you don't speak with the more moderate players, you find yourself in negotiations with the extremists. That's, a simple fact of life. Without suggesting that we don't have challenges with the Palestinian Authority. Going to the concluding question.
And one correction, you did not hear me, but I was kicking myself, because Faith is a rabbi, and I know that I did not mean any disrespect to the Kenters, but it's Rabbi Faith Joy Tentowitz.
I need to say that, a few days before the high holidays, I think it's much better to be a Kenter than a rabbi, but I'm saying it as a rabbi. But, and I don't know, I'll share with you that because there is such a growing demand for reform rabbis in Israel, I'm going to lead the high holiday services in my hometown in Givatayim. So they are even recruiting, me from the Knesset to go back to the pulpit. So we'll have an egalitarian service in the city of Givatayim. Look, this question is a question I'm addressing together with Uri and many other dear Israeli colleagues for decades now. I'm addressing this question for 30 years. Uri is probably doing it for 50 years. And I want to suggest that more than ever, it is quite clear what liberal, progressive, reform, conservative, unaffiliated lovers of Israel can do around the world. First, it is clear today that the civil society is leading the battle. So we need to support the Israeli civil society more than ever. And I said the only reason why we succeeded to delay the judicial coup is the work of the Israeli civil society together with those hundreds of thousands of Israelis. So that's the first thing I want to tell you all. Support the Israeli liberal NGOs, including Hiddush, the Israeli Reform Movement, and many other players. The second thing, it is quite clear that more than ever, the friendly foreign administrations in the Western world, led by the American administration, the Biden administration, are playing a critical role in pushing Netanyahu and letting him know that the judicial coup is not only a domestic issue. And it's amazing to see the way the Western world sees Israel today as a test case, as a leading test case. We hear it from European diplomats. I'm hearing it from, members of the American House of Representatives and the Senate. I just met a few days ago Senator Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire, a purple state. She is deeply tuned to this battle between the more radical ideologies. And Americans and Europeans are looking at the current developments in Israel, and the different administrations around the world are willing to say something quietly and even publicly. And in the end, we all know that in order to bring your governments to say something and to act, your local and domestic political work is also needed. And there are different channels for this political pressure. It is different between Europe and the US, but you know it better than I do, how to impact your governments, your representatives, to tell them that Israel needs them, and if they are truly committed to Israel and to the relations with Israel, their voice must be heard in a very clear way. And the third thing, friends, it's almost a miracle. Suddenly you can see Israeli expats in American cities standing together with members of Reform and conservative congregations and their clergy, standing together in rallies, joining hands together. This is a great moment of opportunity to bring together, veteran American Jews and European Jews together with Israelis that live overseas, and to work together to protect the values of Zionism as we see them. And I think that there are many things, more than ever before, that can be done on the congregational level and the national level of our movements and institutions. I'm addressing, the rabbis, the cantors, the lay leaders of the different Reform communities. You have Israeli groups in your cities or in your states that are working against the judicial coup. Make sure that you invite them to speak in your synagogues. Make sure that your Israel sermon on Yom Kippur or on Rosh Hashanah addresses the judicial coup. Make sure that your synagogues is a meeting place for Jews, expats, Israeli expats, and lovers of Israel that want to work together in order to save Zionism and the future of Israel as a Jewish and democratic state. And Shana Tova to all of you.
Thank you, Gilad. We will meet on the 19th. As I said, the 2023 Israel Religion and State Index with a special focus on the judicial upheaval and on providing you with some analysis of the Supreme Court hearings that are going to take place just a few days earlier with an unprecedented panel of all the 15 justices of the Supreme Court. And if you want, we'll be able to also address some of the questions that Faith alluded to, following on what Gilad said, namely, what can you do at this time? Gilad, you have been wonderful as always. And for those on this call, you should know so many are admiring Gilad's work, want to see him, I don't know, fate or whatever, put him in the leadership core of labor with some challenges, as he alluded to. But you should know that in terms of the public opinion, in terms of the Israeli media, in terms of those that understand the value and the intrinsic aspects of this protest and the existential challenges that face us, Gilad is at the top of the list of those who are called upon to voice an opinion. He is a warrior, a road warrior in the fullest sense of the word in the Knesset, and we are blessed to have him representing all of us. It has nothing to do with politics, and it has nothing to do with religious denomination, representing us in terms of the values of Israel as a liberal, inclusive, Jewish and democratic state. Thank you, Shana Tova, and we look forward to seeing you all. Bye.
Thank you, Uri.
Thank you.